So some of the projects you've done now,
Right.
How did that kind of come about?
Well, the very first one, which was the Small Towns Black Lives,
Mhm.
started when I was leaving New York. My friend Deborah Willis, who actually had helped recommend me to Essence Magazine, had grown up in Philadelphia and had cousins in Whitesboro. And she used to come out in the summertime to visit her cousins as a kid. And so when I was coming down, we had lunch, just sort of a goodbye lunch, heading off, out leaving the city type of thing. And she said, "Oh, you might be interested in this little community, Whitesboro, down in South Jersey, not far from where you're going." And and she was already the curator of photographs at the Schomburg, so she was very familiar with photography, and she's a photographer herself, but became a curator and an art historian. And so she just recommended it to me, and it took me actually a couple of years settling in. I had been photographing industrial landscapes, so I continued to do that for a while. And but then I finally got around to going to Whitesboro, and one thing led to another. I started photographing the community, and that led gradually to other communities, and it just began to expand. I got
I think my phone battery's dying.
I got a copy of Giles Wright's book that he had produced for the New Jersey Historical Commission called A Short History of Afro-Americans in New Jersey. It's a small paperback. And there's a good sizable section on the communities in southern New Jersey. And so that was also an important guide for me in the beginning. Once I had started the Whitesboro pictures, and once I thought I'd like to continue looking at other communities in southern New Jersey, not knowing quite how extensive it would get. The Giles Wright book was an important book in that it sort of told me about Springtown and Goultown and all the other sort of communities that I would start to photograph from.
But different from Brooklyn.
Different from Brooklyn, right? Exactly. Although my mother's family, one of the things I think was compelling is that my mother's family came from rural North Carolina. We still own the farm that my great-grandfather purchased after the Civil War, and all that side of the family is buried there on the farm. So there was always that. I think, even though I didn't grow up in a rural setting, she grew up, and in every summer when she was young, they would go down to North Carolina and spend time with her She would spend time with her grandmother, she and her siblings. And so, for me, growing up around the family table, there were always stories about North Carolina and small towns and going through these rural areas. And so I think that just was, part of my it was part of the narrative of my family. So even though it wasn't a direct experience, it was part of the narrative. So as I started to photograph in some of these smaller communities, and some of them, rural, some of them not so much, some of them more suburban, it just seemed like familiar places in terms of that narrative.
I think a lot of them, there are places too that probably haven't had a lot written about them.
Right, right. And that also, gradually, I didn't know in the beginning what I was doing. I just sort of started with an interesting place and started making photographs. But gradually, certainly, one of the things that emerged was I became interested in the idea of creating a narrative with photographs and eventually with text about the black experience outside the urban narrative. So we know a lot about the black urban experience and all the cultural implications, both positive and negative, that have come out of that experience. And there certainly has been very good literature about the black small town experience, but it didn't seem like there was as much in terms of photographic work being done on small African American towns. And so I just became really interested in the idea that I could work in an area that hadn't maybe been as extensively, covered. I didn't sort of enter it thinking was doing something no one had done, but I thought this is an area that just we haven't spent enough time thinking about what's the African American experience in small towns like.